Welcome to Treasures of Mount Shasta. I'm your host, Mikaelah Cordeo, and we're starting a new fall season, and I have some wonderful guests lined up for you this coming year. Our guest today is going to be Lee Patrick Hanks, and our Mountain Moment will take you to one of Mount Shasta's hidden treasures. It's right in the middle of town, and it's not that hard to find, but most people never see it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later too. It's the Elsa Rupp, it's a memorial park, and quite lovely. Our theme, as you know, is to honor the special people and places of Mount Shasta, just as the Japanese honored their extraordinary artisans and artists as national treasures. So I find that we have our personal treasures here in Mount Shasta in the people and the places, and so I bring them to you each show. And today I'd like to welcome my guest, Lee Patrick Hanks. He is a researcher. He's got some extraordinary experiences with extraterrestrials that I'm sure you're going to want to hear more about. He's been working with Max the Crystal Skull, which I don't know a lot about, and we're going to hear more about that. And so welcome to the show, Lee.
Thank you, thank you.
We talked beforehand, and so I got to know him a little bit, and I'm extremely impressed with the depth of your knowledge and the degree to which you really have researched and explored in detail all of what you talk about. So I just want people to have confidence in knowing that you are very well respected as well as well-researched.
Well, thank you. That's honorable. I don't know if I'm well respected. We'll find out.
Well, I respect you anyway.
Yeah, I stir up a lot of people's emotions and possibilities of what's coming for our world.
Right. Well, let's start with some of your early experiences, because they were quite extraordinary, and I know that's what led you on this journey. So why don't you share a little bit about what your experiences were?
Back in the 70s, when this, quote, New Age movement was just starting to get its foothold after the extraordinary 60s, I was involved with the beginning of the studies of Eastern philosophy. I was doing my undergraduate work in psychology and wanted to extend that into something more, because I knew there was so much more to know about consciousness and spirituality, not knowing what I was looking for at the time. So I became a yogic monk after I did my undergraduate work for about 6.5 years.
Wow.
And really went into the Eastern traditions as it was just coming into the country. I was doing yoga back in the 70s, and people thought it was pretty strange. A few of us did anyway. And that was the beginning of the movement, which is now on every corner of almost every city. There's a yoga studio, so it's come mainstream, which is really amazing
but
to
there
watch.
was a time when there was a lot of trepidation about what are those people doing, what is yoga, it's unchristian, it's unsafe.
Absolutely.
What if you hurt your body, or what if you wreck your mind, all that concern. Plus,
cultish
it
kind
was
of
connected to
attitudes.
cult kind of problems that we'd experienced at those times.
Yeah,
so.
and it was a great lesson and great learning curve for myself too, because I ended up having to let go of that, move on to the next levels of my understanding and consciousness and what was going on, and not just in this particular world, but having some unusual experiences as I was younger, and even playing sports and having out of body or extraordinary abilities to do things when you can't explain what it was. So the yogic training was very good for the next step in my evolution of my consciousness and my experiences, which was then the introduction to, I guess you could say, off-planetary beings or star beings or extraterrestrials.
Okay, so you described to me that you felt that you were abducted by extraterrestrials. Do you want to talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, it's a long history. I started having experiences after I went through a pretty strong, complete releasing of the whole Eastern philosophy. I didn't let go of the structure itself, because there's some very solid things that would be following any cosmic laws that we would talk about within any systems, whether it be religious or spiritual. And then I went into the next phase, which was other dimensional realities, which is when I had my first abduction experience back in early 80s, and went through a tremendous total reconfiguration of my life, and a lot of things broke down, and went through about 10 years of very dramatic changes and very challenging times. All this experience was documented on the Learning Channel and the Discovery Channel in 1993.
What were some key lessons that you felt you were taken through in that process?
Well, two things that drove me to continue my life, even though unfortunately a lot of people that have had abductions usually commit suicide.
Really?
Yeah, it's a
I wasn't
huge-
aware of that. I
a
knew
huge
that it was
percentage
a
of
very
them do.
challenging
Yeah.
time because, among other things, it's hard to get anybody to believe that it happened to you.
Well, especially back in 1980.
And it can be quite traumatic,
It was incredibly
even if
traumatic.
they're nice.
Well, these weren't the nice ones in the beginning. I went through the Greys or the Zeta Reticuli,
Yes,
and they were now.
They're the
certainly
commonly publicized one with the big
head,
eyes.
big
and
eyes,
yeah.
yeah, small bodies. The two things that drove me to keep going was, how did they do that? First of all, they took me out of my bedroom and brought me into a ship, and then I awakened because of some extraordinary things that I remember from my sports training, which was they're ammonia-based beings, so they smell like ammonia.
Ammonia-based.
So when I
That's
had got knocked out playing sports a couple times, and they had those little ammonia snips.
Things to wake you up. Right.
Well, that's what happened to me, and that's when I remembered being on the ship. And so that was one of my first experiences of remembrance. Then I went through extensive deprogramming and went through a lot of past life regression and hypnotherapy with some very, very skillful people down in South Florida for many years to go through the whole process. And then I went and I met up with John Mack, who was the first psychiatrist in the world at Harvard that would start validating and listen to the people that have had these extraordinary experiences.
Right.
And I was a part of that research, and then the documentary, and John Mack and Bud Hopkins, who was the #1 researcher in the world at the time in '93, and Edgar Mitchell, who is the astronaut who had gone to the moon, who also had extraordinary experiences, which he was not allowed to talk about for a long time, and still is
That's right.
a little careful today, but he has finally said they are here. There's no question about it. We were at a press conference in April in Washington, D.C. There was myself and many colleagues and Edgar Mitchell, everyone that's involved with this, basically the exposure and disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence on our planet, came together in a unified field and asked the Obama administration to start disclosing some of the information that's now and has been hidden in the files, which many other countries are finally coming out and doing in the last year or
there's
two.
really a great clearing of the veils of secrecy and keeping things hidden. So I think it speaks for the maturing of world population that people don't freak out. I mean, you know, there's been enough written about it, spoken about it, movies made about it, that at least it's in the consciousness. It's not this big shock. Oh, I never heard of that.
Right.
How could that be? So it's in our consciousness now, and we're ready to take that next step into more recognition of.
This is what the
What it
exopolitics movement is about, which is what was this conference in Washington that Stephen Bassett has been involved with now for several years. It's not even anymore proving that there are extraterrestrials. It's how are we going to deal with as a civilization and a society in the coming years, because
Right.
this will be a part of our upcoming reality. There's no question, there's no doubt. The evidence is beyond being refuted at this point, and it's from many,
Right.
many countries from around the world. So.
Well, maybe you could say something about the impact that movies are having, because, you know, E.T. Come Home was on the more positive side, but there's been some enormously negative movies made about extraterrestrials. Do you want to say
yeah,
anything
and that's
about
been
that?
a part of the controlling atmosphere of this planet for a long time. I've discussed this for many years, and have, again, part of my research and my goal was, first of all, how do they take someone and bring them up onto a spaceship, which is really in a different frequency field or harmonic or energetic pattern.
So it's a higher dimensional reality.
An octave of a higher dimension, yeah.
Yes,
Because right
okay.
now we're moving from the third to the fourth and moving towards the fifth around 2012, which is unprecedented in our history from what we know of research. So as they did this, one of the biggest things I wanted to know was, and as I came back, it literally distorted my entire electrical body and my physical body. So it took me years to come back from the experience. And doing that, I found out that that was the driving force of me staying here on the planet, because basically I had experienced something of a higher nature, so why would I want to be here now? So going
Right.
back to the other point that I wanted to make was that the two things that really kept me going, one of them was how did they do it, and why, and who are they? And that led me into a 20-year, and even today it's still enormous, as to how many different aspects of star beings or extraterrestrials are visiting our planet, and how all of them relate to the significance of 2012.
Okay, so I have two questions that come to mind as you say that. One is there something you can share with our viewers on discernment? How do you determine whether being is positive or not positive?
Well,
or even a movie for that matter.
Well, and I will, the thing you talked about a moment ago about the negativity of the extraterrestrials, this has been a planned, I believe, a planned move amongst those that don't want the public at large or consciousness to come to the next steps, which I'm calling our galactic graduation time. And we're moving into a period where we are going to be coming out of the incubation stage as humans, very controlled and unfortunately very sequestered human consciousness, to a huge opening as we move towards 2012 and beyond. And it's all in the history, and it's also in the science of what's happening right now, what's coming. To look at it from a negative standpoint, a lot of my research in the beginning was to identify who the players were. And we're talking about the Greys or the Zeta Reticuli, we're talking about reptilian, draconians, and then there's the others, like the Arcturians, the Andromedans, the Antarians, the Pleiadians, the Sirians. I mean, these are all different aspects of different soul groups or different clans.
And then we also hear that even among those supposedly more negative races, that there's the positive element or the negative element among them. And, so it's hard to say, but I always have people check. Always get your own have your own rule of thumb for inner guidance. Get a good yes and no answer for yourself. Some people like to use pendulums. I use myself as a pendulum. I just stand up, and if I fall forward, that's a yes, and if I'm pushed backward, that's a no. And I always tell people, practice that. Practice on things that don't have, it's like you don't want to ask your first question, should I spend $1 million on this, or is that person going to murder me? You want to have trust in your process. So I tell people to go to the grocery store and say, should I get carrots or broccoli? And develop trust in your inner guidance, and then when you need it for the more important questions, it's there for you.
Well, part of that trusting is what it was a 25-year story for myself, and being able to discern what was real, what wasn't real, what was very dark and negative as far as polarity consciousness, what I can bring to people today from my experiences, and discerning what are the key elements, what are the most important things we should be looking at from this point on towards 2000 and beyond. I'm actually really past the point of trying to prove that there are extraterrestrials. My work and research tells me that we're at a time in the most critical point in the history of this planet, and we are getting lots of help from outside sources, whether it be the extraterrestrials or star seeds or star beings.
Angelics.
And we're getting it from many realms, and we're also getting it from the Telosians, those that reside here inside this earth. Mount Shasta is
which
one of the key
is
points.
a whole other growing awareness for all of us.
Yes.
I mean, even though I've heard about it for years, it had to kind of come and knock me over the head several times before I began to say, oh, I have to bring this much more forward in my consciousness and in my willingness to accept this reality. I can't just pretend like it's not happening. It kept intervening in my life and making changes. And I had to, 3 in a row, and it was like, okay, I'm listening.
Well, part of what we're being asked to now, and as we move towards the magnetic shifts and changes of the planet, we're moving towards a very powerful solar 24 wave that's going to hit us somewhere around 2012. We don't know exactly when that will be according to the scientific data. It's going to affect everything on this planet that's also in the planet as well as above the planet, meaning that it's going to be an unprecedented time for the history of the Earth, not just this particular civilization. And preparation for that is about opening up,
there's
accepting.
Tremendous amounts of prophecy from the Hopis, Nostradamus, and whoever did prophecy, and biblical prophecies and Tibetan prophecies. That's all, the Mayan prophecies, all leading to this tremendous unfoldment that's happening. But when people say, well, what's going to happen? Do you think it's this? Do you think it's that? I said, well, I think it's going to be very similar to the harmonic convergence and Y2K. We did not know what was going to happen. We had all these expectations. It didn't turn out the way we thought it was going to. And I don't think it will probably turn out the way we're anticipating, but we know there will be huge influx of light and energy and huge transformation internally.
Well, I would take it a step further from the research and certainly from the experiences and talking to many brilliant people around the world over the last several years. We are going to go through something very dramatic. The visionary leaders that are in this country right now, there was about 40 of them that gathered here in July in La Costa over in down South California. There wasn't one of them in that group, and we're talking very famous people that I don't need to mention on camera, but certainly all of them that you would know if you went to any New Age bookstore. And they've all agreed that we are going to go through something very, very dramatic. And so the dramatic part of it is, as the ancients and especially the Mayans are talking about in their latest, and finally Don Alejandro, who was the head of the Mayan Council and Elders, just recently came out and said that they're going to set the record straight for humanity as far as their history goes, and tell the people of this world that they've been through two of these that they remember in their history.
The Mayans, yes, they've got historical records on that.
And basically what they're saying is that there is a time period of anywhere from 20 to 40 hours where the planet itself is going to go into what we call a null zone or a 0 point, which means that everything will stop, including the magnetics, including all kinds of things, which we don't have time to talk about today.
Well, is that like, let's say the planet was rotating this way and it stops, and it may indeed start rotating in another direction, which does happen every so many thousand years.
According to the pole shifts or magnetic shifts, about every 13,000 years in the research, yes. It could be more than that. We might actually have a crust or a layered surface shift as well. And there's a lot of evidence is sort of suggesting that that's possible. Most important thing for people to get ready, and this is what really most of my work is now when I go out and speak and when I work with people personally, is how do we prepare ourselves personally and individually for such a huge shift? And I'm calling it the shift of the ages. We're talking about moving from the possibility of mortality and the genetics that are pretty much locked down, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of people still aren't awakening and aren't really wanting to listen to what's happening from multidimensional sources. That we've got to start turning on switches inside of us, which is call them our light codes, our DNA, which has been shut down. We've got about 20 of the 64 codons in those switches that are off.
Right.
Part of the civilizations in the past, Atlantis, Lemuria, they were turned off. And so we are sort of coming back into the possibilities of moving towards a stage of mortality to light body consciousness and immortality.
Immortality.
And this is what the ancient systems are saying.
Turning on some of these internal
switches. I call them switches.
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier that Max, the crystal skull, triggers some of this for people.
Max is one of the ancient artifacts that's still been left over from, we believe, Atlantis, and possibly even older than that. It is considered to be one of the oldest artifacts we have in our possession at this time on this planet. And I've been traveling with Max for the last 4 years and speaking either the opening or closing act, or sometimes the part of the workshop or the presentation with Max is he's an accelerator, he's an activator. And I say it as a he because it's really not a male or a female. It is a representation of the original DNA perfected codes that we had, what we think we had in Atlantis.
So it's somehow encoded in the crystal. And
there's an emanation inside the crystal.
And the fact that it's a skull is really just...
it's an encasement, it's a transducer.
Well, it's also the message. This is about the human form. You know, this is about the body.
Well, and how do you activate the body? How do you get it ready?
And the bones are actually hold historical records, so it's all symbolic as well.
Well, it's actually cellular. It's
right.
We have it in our memory
Yes.
because everything we've ever experienced throughout history of this planet is in every one of our cells. We know that. Science is starting to get closer and closer to that absolute confirmation of that. And Max has been through several shifts of energy and consciousness, and also the ancients talk about those that would embody these crystal skulls and prepare themselves for their whole lifetime and then actually do a sacrifice to go into the skull with their soul or their light body. So they would hold the 1,000-year history.
I actually have heard of that there are beings that embody or that ensoul
and if
certain crystals.
If you go on a Google search and look for Max the Crystal Skull, and we've got some, I do this in my PowerPoint presentation, there are manifestations that come out of the skull that we have pictures of, that people have taken in different settings all around the country. where there's forms or shapes. There's an actual spine with the head that comes out. I have a picture of that on my...
Wow.
Yeah, it's an actual manifestation. And we didn't even know we were doing it and seeing it at the time.
You've got videos on your website. It's in some of your videos.
I've got some
maybe?
pictures, and then we're going to be doing more with Max over the next several months as we tour around more. But the key thing for people to understand is that it's really important for us to activate what we call our light body or our Merkabic field now.
Do you have some suggestions for... There are people who know what that is, and there are people who don't know. Can you say a little bit more that helps both of those groups?
Sure. Yeah. When you go to sleep at night, we all travel into different energetic fields, okay?
Okay.
Your
soul
You can call it your soul.
Places.
In the sacred geometric or the ancient systems, we call it their Merkaba. It is the shape or the triangulation of the...
So it's like a geometric grid in the etheric that your soul travels in.
Well, it's really our imprint of who we are as an energetic being in this part of the galaxy or this part of this universe.
Okay.
So we have an encasement, and we know pretty much that most everything in the universe is based on math. And it's sacred geometry or shapes or forms.
It's very interesting, and if you're a mathematician, it all makes perfect sense, but for almost everybody else, it's an act of faith.
Well, if you thought of it this way, if you look at anything in nature, it has a geometric form, a shape. You can put it in a microscope, you can look at it. We have sunflowers right here. It's one of the most perfect geometric forms in the center of it. It all is based on numbers and math and structure that is either going to adapt and move into higher frequencies, or if it doesn't have a high enough geometry, it drops down.
Right.
2012...
So it's all based on the Flower of Life grid.
That's part of it.
Which anybody who's interested in exploring that a little bit more, there's some amazing... The Flower of Life is a template on which all of creation is based, and you can see it represented certainly in flowers very readily, but in a lot of other symbols too. And here we have an example up on the screen of the light body. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, and this is part of what we talk about with the Merkaba, or the shape of the Merkaba. It's really an energetic field, and there are layers. And the chakras that we hold within in the physical body, or the neurology, is also emanating frequencies and fields and waves. Right. So when you go to sleep at night, we have our light body, which is an emanation of the physical body. But as we move out and go into other realms, it has an imprint that carries your entire history of who you are as a soul. Mm-hmm. So what the ancients have been telling us for thousands of years with the mystery schools and with the different systems of knowledge is that at some point we just basically move into higher fields of energy, and that shape that we are carrying in our light body in the dream time becomes our physical as well. That's what the merging of 2012 and the 0 point's talking about. The planet itself is going to go through a configuration along into the Milky Way, which is a very important part of the research now that NASA and everyone has agreed upon, which the Mayans and the ancients have known for thousands of years, that we're going to reach this moment when everything on this planet is going to come to a neutral reality. That means that if we've got locks and blocks, if we've got old systems of beliefs, programs, controlled realities, they're going to be neutralized in a way that we've never seen before. The great news about that is that we get to start over as humans, and if we prepare ourselves moving into this shift, working on the light bodies, the codons, turning on the switches, is what much of the spiritual movement has really been about for a long time, then we have a chance to reboot, reconfigure.
Right. Well, I try to point people to just looking at the systems around them that are falling away, and to know this is the time of choosing more perfectly that which is right for you.
Higher, reaching for higher aspects of the divine imprint instead of it being personality or the past or belief systems that no longer serve. Or I had to do
this. I had to work to make a living, and this was the only thing I could do.
Right.
But to follow that which gives you joy, that which you experience beauty, light, love, that which is uplifting. Mm-hmm. Those are the paths that work for people. And, you know, if you've had a lot of negativity in your life, it may be hard to learn to believe that. But in fact, following your joy actually works.
Well, and there's absolute scientific research now that proves that when you excite the body with joy, with ecstasy, you know, of any kind of emotional upliftment, there's these little carriers that go along the neurology paths called telomeres. And these telomeres send signals into the codons, which are housing the DNA imprints, which are either going to trigger and uplift or you're going to go down. These telomeres go in and they start giving excitement to the DNA.
Oh, so it actually is activating the body. Joy activates the body.
Absolutely. And this is when that happens, then the DNA starts sending signals to the master gland, pineal, pituitary.
So you don't actually have to know a lot of detail, just go for the joy.
Well, but you know, in a way that is
way.
sustained and that it's reaching towards the highest and best for yourself and for all.
Right.
So this is why community coming up and the idea of working together and reducing the competition and the consciousness of power over instead of using power together is these are the key components, and this is where people get stuck because they still think that they can still act in their normal everyday lives or run under the conditions of what the planetary grid's been running in the old matrix instead of preparing towards the new.
All right. Well, we're moving to the point in the show where we're going to our mountain moment right now. And I'm going to give the people in the studio time to get started. We're visiting the Elsa Rupp Nature Study area. It's right in Mt Shasta on Old Stage Road, right off the main central exit on the other side of the freeway from town. It's just right around the corner from the Lake Street exit on Old Stage Road. You come in to a little hidden driveway parking area, and here we enter into this nature area. It's very, very beautiful. Many trees, and this woman dedicated this land as a memorial to her parents, and I know so many people are losing friends and family and pets, and there's a lot of letting go happening. So as we do our visual journey through these paths, walking through the trees and experiencing the light coming through the trees, just taking a look at every little piece of it. Just imagine yourself walking gently through these trees and honoring that which was your relationships, honoring the people you loved as they are passing over and going on. And just allow yourself to walk gently down these paths, appreciating the beauty of nature all around you. If you're in town and you want a really quick, significant hit of nature, this is the place to go. Here's some beautiful, the Sacramento River is still small here as it's moving through this park. It's just beautiful. It's healing, it's natural. And we're coming to the end of our show now, and I just want to thank you for being with us. Is there one last thing you want to say to the audience?
I'll be in town here for several weeks and doing some workshops and presentations, and I'm really thrilled being in Mount Shasta. It's wonderful. Fantastic.
Well, I look forward to experiencing some of your work, and your website has come up several times. So thank you all. God bless you, and keep expanding your inner guidance. I did some influence.